So now we will move on to the female reproductive system. While it's obviously very different than the male reproductive system, you'll actually find there are a lot of similarities between the two. So the female reproductive system, the gonads are going to be the ovaries, since that is where the gametes are going to be made. Females also have a duct system, like the males have a duct system. It's just theirs is going to include the uterine tubes, which you've probably always heard called the fallopian tubes, the uterus and the vagina, and then the external genitalia is what we'll finish with for the structures. So as you can see right here, we do have the ovaries. Then these are going to be the fimbriae, the fallopian or uterine tubes, the uterus, and then the vagina. And I want you to notice the position of where the uterus and vagina are in comparison to the bladder and the rectum. So here we have the bladder. So obviously when women are pregnant and the uterus is expanding to take up this space, you'll see why they have to go to the restroom all the time, because it's putting all the pressure on the bladder. And then this is the pubic symphysis right here. And then back here we have the rectum. So it's going to be located in between the urinary bladder and the rectum. So the ovaries are composed of ovarian follicles. The follicles are going to be these little bitty sac-like structures that are going to develop around each of the oocytes. So an oocyte is an immature egg, and basically the follicle is going to be what surrounds the oocyte and allows it to mature over time each month before it is ovulated and released. So inside the ovary, here we have a primary follicle. So whenever a female is born, she's actually born with all of the primary oocytes she's ever going to have. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, I actually had all of the primary oocytes of what will one day become my grandchildren. It's kind of a weird concept when you think about it, but that's just how it works. So each month you will have one primary oocyte surrounded by a primary follicle that will start to mature. So you'll see that the follicle will start to grow. At this point, now the follicle is considered to be mature, and we call it a Graafian follicle. And this will be what will actually rupture and release the secondary oocyte. So during this time, not only is the follicle maturing, but the oocyte is maturing as well. So by the time it's released, it is considered a secondary oocyte, and it won't actually be considered an ovum or an egg unless it becomes fertilized. It won't undergo that last stage of meiosis until then. Once the egg is released or ovulated, then that follicle will actually turn into the corpus luteum, and over time that corpus luteum will degenerate completely, and then the process starts all over, except for some women will actually release more than one egg a month. So this would be happening on multiple, not just for one egg. So I just described the different follicle stages. So we have the primary follicle at the very beginning. It's an immature oocyte inside. The Graafian follicle is going to be the mature follicle. Ovulation is whenever the follicle ruptures and releases the secondary oocyte. On average, this is going to be about every 28 days, which is about the same length as the menstrual cycle, since they are actually related. But it's going to be different for each woman. And then, like I said, the ruptured follicle transforms into the corpus luteum. So support for the ovaries are actually not physically attached to the fallopian tubes, but they're also just not floating around the abdominal pelvic cavity either. They are going to be attached to different ligaments. So we have the suspensory ligaments. They're going to secure the ovary to the lateral walls of the pelvis, so towards the side. You have the ovarian ligaments, which are going to attach it to the actual uterus. And then you have the broad ligament, which is going to be a fold of the peritoneum, which is the serous membrane inside your abdominal pelvic cavity. And that actually encloses the suspensory ligament. During pregnancies, these ligaments can actually get a lot of pressure on them. They can even start to somewhat tear and it can be extremely painful. So as you can see right here, so this is the broad ligament. Here we have the ovarian ligament. This is the round ligament of the uterus. Where's some other ligament? The suspensory ligament right here. You'll notice that the ovary, like I said, it looks like it's attached to the fallopian tubes, but it is not physically attached to it. So that is why it's important that you have these ligaments in here holding them in the correct spot. The duct system of the female, remember the males, we have the epididymis, the vas deferens, the urethra. And the females, you're going to have the uterine or fallopian tubes, the uterus, and then the vagina. Pretty much the job of the fallopian tubes, they are going to receive the ovulated oocyte. Even though it's not physically connected to the ovaries, they do have these little finger-like projections on the end called fimbriae that are going to help to kind of guide. Whenever I see them, I always think they're kind of like the sea anemones. They're going to help actually guide the released oocyte into the fallopian tubes. This is where fertilization will occur because a secondary oocyte will only be viable for about 24 hours, yet it takes about 3 to 4 days for the oocyte to travel down the length of the fallopian tube. So fertilization will occur in here, or it can actually occur outside of the fallopian tubes, closer to the ovaries as well. They are physically attached to the uterus, and like I said, there's little or no contact between the ovaries and the fallopian tubes, and it is supported and enclosed by the broad ligament. The fimbriae are those little finger-like projections I was talking about that are going to be at the distal end of the uterine tube. That help to guide the oocyte from the ovary and towards the uterus. On the inside of the fallopian tubes, they will be lined with cilia. That is going to help to also guide the oocyte towards the uterus. Like I said, it's going to take about 3 to 4 days for the oocyte to make its way through the fallopian tubes. Fertilization is going to occur in here because, like I said, the oocyte only lives for about 24 hours. So fertilization is absolutely not going to occur inside the uterus unless you have in vitro fertilization going on. But naturally, fertilization will occur within the uterine tube. So like I said, where's my mouse? Like I said, it'll release, you'll have ovulation, releasing a secondary oocyte into this area. Here are those fimbriae that are going to help guide the secondary oocyte into the fallopian tubes. So within 24 hours, that's about the only amount of time that that oocyte is going to be viable. However, some people hyperovulate, so they can actually release more than one egg a month. So that kind of increases that time range. So the uterus is located between the urinary bladder and rectum, like I showed you on the diagram earlier. It is a hollow organ. Its functions basically receive a fertilized egg, retain the fertilized egg, and then nourish the fertilized egg until you deliver a baby. Support for the uterus, some of these are going to be the same as what we talked about for the ovaries. You have the broad ligament, which is attached to the pelvis. The round ligament is going to anchor it anteriorly, so towards the front. And then the uterosacral ligaments, which are going to anchor it posteriorly. Remember, the sacrum is going to be the last portion of your vertebral column in between your lumbar vertebrae and then your coccyx or your tailbone. Regions of the uterus. The main portion of the uterus is called the body of the uterus. Then the fundus is going to be the top kind of curved portion. This is actually whenever they are measuring how far along a woman is or measuring to see whether a baby is growing at the correct rate. They will actually be filling for the fundus of the uterus to make those measurements. And then the cervix is going to be the narrow outlet that protrudes into the vagina. And it's actually like the neck of the uterus. Like the cervical region of your vertebrae is your neck area. So the cervix of the uterus is going to be basically like the neck of the uterus. So the walls of the uterus, the endometrium is going to be the innermost layer. It does allow for implantation of fertilized egg each month. If no pregnancy occurs, then the menses is going to be what sloughs off, or basically shreds off, that inner endometrial wall. So during the menses, it's not just blood that's being released, it's actually going to be a mixture of blood with tissues, because it's actually the walls of the uterus that are being expelled during the menses. The myometrium is going to be the middle layer. This is made up of smooth muscle. And then the perimetrium is going to be the outermost layer. It is going to be the layer of the serous membrane. So it is the visceral peritoneum. The peritoneum is the serous membrane within your abdominal pelvic cavity, which, keeps the organs from having a lot of friction with each other. And so this visceral layer of the peritoneum is going to be the outermost layer of the actual uterus. So we have, the inner layer is going to be the endometrium. Then this thick layer right here of muscle is the myometrium. And then this outer layer is going to be the perimetrium. Sorry. Oh, and like I was talking about earlier, this is going to be the fundus of the uterus. This is the body of the uterus. And then this is going to be the cervical area, or the cervix. The vagina extends from the cervix to the exterior of the body. It is located between the bladder and the rectum. It serves as both the birth canal for the delivering a baby, and it also receives the penis during sexual intercourse. The hymen is going to be the tissue that partially closes the vagina until it's ruptured. So when people say the term popping a cherry, or when women experience bleeding during their first sexual intercourse, it is usually from the hymen rupturing. But there are some certain scenarios where women either are not born with hymen, or there are different structures of the hymen. Some, it can actually be ruptured due to tampons. Girls who grew up horseback riding, things like that, can actually rupture the hymen. So this is what they did back in the old days, on the marriage night. The next day, they would, like, the elders of the community would come in and check the sheets and make sure that there was actually blood on the sheets. And if there wasn't, then basically it meant she wasn't a virgin, and the guy could basically get rid of her if he didn't want to have her anymore because of that. So good thing that people don't live in those times anymore, but it is because of the hymen that occurs. And you can't see it on this diagram. And I will pick up on the external genitalia on the next round of it.